A NASA scientist just broke their silence about Yellowstone's supervolcano, and what they revealed wasn't supposed to reach the public. While officials evacuated 10,000 visitors from Yellowstone and even more from surrounding communities, NASA has been quietly working on something that could change everything we know about this geological time bomb. What exactly did this insider reveal? Stay, because what you're about to discover will completely change how you think about America's most dangerous natural threat. Let me start by painting you a picture of what we're really dealing with here. Yellowstone National Park isn't just America's first national park. It's sitting on top of one of the most dangerous geological features on Earth. Beneath those beautiful geysers and hot springs lies an enormous chamber filled with molten rock that could literally reshape the continent. In 2015, researchers from the University of Utah made a discovery that changed everything. They found that the magma chamber under Yellowstone is much bigger than anyone previously thought. We're not talking about a small underground pocket of lava. This thing is massive. The magma reservoir is 44 miles wide, 30 miles long, and 12 miles deep. To put that in perspective, all this magma could fill the Grand Canyon not once, but 11 times over. Now here's where things get really concerning. This massive chamber is pushing against the ground above it, causing the land to rise approximately 3 inches every year. Between 2004 and 2011, the ground level over the volcano increased by about 1 foot. Think about that for a moment. The Earth itself is literally bulging upward because of the immense pressure building underneath. But here's what the Yellowstone Volcano Observatory doesn't want you to panic about. They claim this process either stopped or slowed down in 2015, and they say it's just the supervolcano breathing. They want you to believe it's normal for the ground to move up and down without erupting. But is that really the whole story? The truth is, Yellowstone has a volcanic explosivity index rating of 8 out of 10. That's not just high, that's catastrophic level. And while experts keep telling us not to worry, more than 1,000 bison recently left the park. Official sources say this has nothing to do with potential danger, but animals often sense things we can't. Let me explain exactly what we're dealing with when we talk about supervolcanoes, because most people don't truly understand the scale of destruction we're facing. The United States Geological Survey classifies a volcano as super if it has produced at least one explosion that expelled more than 240 cubic miles of material. That's more than twice the volume of Lake Erie being shot into the atmosphere. These aren't just big eruptions, they're civilization-ending events. We're talking about avalanches of hot rock and gases racing down the volcano's flanks at hundreds of miles per hour, followed by worldwide climatic impacts that could last for years. But here's the part that should really concern you. Just because a volcano has had a super-eruption in the past doesn't mean its future eruptions will be smaller. In fact, they could be even worse. According to the USGS, none of the 5,000 eruptions over the last 10,000 years ranked as a VI8. While dozens of volcanoes erupt around the world on any given day, scientists have documented only 42 eruptions that ranked VI8 or high 7 in the last 36 million years. Yellowstone is responsible for multiple entries on that terrifying list. Yellowstone isn't just any supervolcano, it's perhaps the most dangerous one on the planet. This geological monster has had at least 3 massive eruptions in its history. 2 were VI8 super-eruptions that occurred 2.1 million and 640,000 years ago, and 1 was a VI7 that still managed to eject around 67 cubic miles of material into the atmosphere. The most recent super-eruption was called the Lava Creek eruption, and it formed the Yellowstone caldera we see today after spilling out 240 cubic miles of rock, dust, and volcanic ash. To help you visualize this, imagine 65 million Capitol building rotundas in Washington, D.C., all piled together. That's the volume of material this monster can eject in a single eruption. Now here's what scientists want you to focus on to keep you calm. They say the magma in Yellowstone's shallow reserve is only 5 to 15% molten, and that an eruption normally requires at least 50% molten material. They want you to believe this means we're safe, that at worst we might see a lava flow rather than an explosive eruption. But what they're not telling you is how quickly these conditions can change and what NASA has discovered about the true timeline we might be facing. Now let me walk you through what would actually happen if Yellowstone erupted today, because the reality is far worse than most people imagine. This isn't fear-mongering, this is based on scientific modeling and historical evidence from previous super-eruptions. Right before the eruption, the ground around Yellowstone would lift dramatically. Those famous geothermal pools and geysers would heat up to temperatures well above their current 104 degrees Celsius. They would also become incredibly acidic, turning into literal death traps. As magma rises to the surface, the pressure would build until the roof rock of the magma chambers simply couldn't resist anymore. When the eruption finally kicks off, a massive column of lava and ash will explode upward to a height of over 25 km. But that's just the beginning. This column would keep pumping ash for days, possibly weeks. The mixture of lava, ash, and gas would be hotter than 800 degrees Celsius and would move at speeds of around 300 miles per hour. The air near the center of the eruption would heat up to nearly 270 degrees Celsius. Here's where it gets truly catastrophic. Colorado, Utah, and Wyoming would be buried under almost 90 cm of toxic volcanic ash. Many regions would be plunged into complete darkness. Even coastal areas where most Americans live would experience severe problems as the ash cloud spreads across the continent. The ash would destroy crops and contaminate pastures for thousands of square miles. Power lines and electrical transformers would fail under the weight and corrosive properties of the ash. But here's the part that should terrify you most. If you inhaled this ash, it would turn into a glassy cement in your lungs within seconds. You can imagine how that would end. Buildings would start collapsing under the weight of the ash. Within just days, a 10-foot layer of ash would cover an area of about 80 km around the eruption center. Salt Lake City would receive 1.5 meters of ash. Even distant cities like Los Angeles, San Francisco, Chicago, New York, Miami, and Toronto would be covered in a thin but dangerous layer. The ash would make the water unsafe to drink. Vehicles would break down. There would be no flights to or from North America for months, possibly years. Once the ash reached the stratosphere, global temperatures would drop so severely that there would be no summer in parts of the world for several years. Monsoon seasons would change, agriculture would collapse, and food supplies would be disrupted worldwide. FEMA has estimated that the potential damage would exceed $3 trillion in the United States alone. But that's just the economic cost. The human cost would be immeasurable. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss any future episodes. Don't forget to share it with your friends, too. It helps the channel out, and I'm excited to continue bringing you more awesome content. This brings us to the NASA revelation that wasn't supposed to become public. Following the publication of an article about supervolcanoes, a group of NASA researchers released a previously classified report about the threat and what could potentially be done about it. Brian Wilcox of NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory at the California Institute of Technology was a member of NASA's Advisory Council on Planetary Defense, which studied ways for NASA to defend the planet from asteroids and comets. During that study, he came to a startling conclusion that the supervolcano threat is substantially greater than the asteroid or comet threat. Think about that for a moment. NASA, the organization that tracks potentially world-ending asteroids, believes that supervolcanoes pose a greater threat to human civilization. There are approximately 20 known supervolcanoes on Earth, with large eruptions occurring once every 100,000 years on average. But here's the terrifying part: we're overdue. The most serious threat posed by a super-eruption would be famine. A prolonged volcanic winter could prevent civilization from producing enough food to feed the current global population. In 2012, the United Nations estimated that global food stocks would last only 74 days. Imagine what would happen if a supervolcano eruption eliminated agricultural production for multiple growing seasons. When NASA scientists investigated this problem, they discovered something remarkable. The most logical solution was to simply cool the supervolcano. Yellowstone is essentially a massive heat generator, producing enough energy to power 6 industrial power plants. Currently, Yellowstone releases 60 to 70% of the heat rising from below into the atmosphere through water seeping into the magma chamber, via fissures. The rest settles within the magma, allowing it to dissolve additional volatile gases and minerals. Here's the key insight that NASA doesn't want widely known. When the temperature rises to a certain critical level, an explosive eruption becomes unavoidable. However, if more heat could be extracted from the system, the supervolcano would never reach that critical threshold. According to NASA's calculations, if heat transport from Yellowstone's magma chamber could be increased by just 35%, the park would no longer pose a threat to civilization. The question then becomes, how do you cool down a supervolcano? NASA's first idea was straightforward but impractical: simply add more water to the supervolcano. However, as Wilcox explains, convincing legislators to support such an endeavor would be nearly impossible. Building a major aqueduct uphill into a mountainous region would be both costly and difficult, and people don't want their water used that way. With water shortages affecting people around the world, a major infrastructure project where water is only used to cool down a supervolcano would be extremely controversial. So NASA devised an entirely different strategy, one that's both brilliant and potentially dangerous. They proposed drilling up to 10 kilometers deep into the supervolcano and pumping high-pressure water down into the magma chamber. The circulating water would return at a temperature of around 350 degrees Celsius, steadily draining heat from the volcano day by day. But here's where this plan becomes both fascinating and terrifying. While such a project would cost approximately $3.46 billion, there's an economic incentive that might persuade lawmakers to approve it. Wilcox estimates that Yellowstone currently emits approximately 6 gigawatts of heat. By drilling in this way, it could be used to create a massive geothermal power plant. This geothermal plant could generate electricity at extremely competitive prices of around 10 cents per kilowatt hour. As Wilcox explains, you would have to give geothermal companies incentives to drill deeper and use hotter water than they usually would. But you would pay back your initial investment and generate electricity that could power the surrounding area for potentially tens of thousands of years. The long-term benefit would be preventing a future supervolcano eruption that could devastate humanity. It sounds like the perfect solution, doesn't it? But there's a catch that NASA doesn't want to publicize. Here's what NASA doesn't want you to know about their plan. Drilling into an active supervolcano could potentially trigger the very eruption they're trying to prevent. When you're dealing with a system containing enough molten rock to fill the Grand Canyon 11 times over, any intervention carries enormous risks. The drilling process itself could destabilize the magma chamber. Introducing high-pressure water into a delicately balanced geological system could create new fractures or expand existing ones. If the drilling accidentally breaches a critical barrier or creates an unexpected pathway for magma to reach the surface, the result could be catastrophic. There's also the question of timing. The drilling and cooling process would take years, possibly decades, to complete. During that time, natural geological processes continue. What happens if Yellowstone shows signs of an imminent eruption while the cooling system is only partially installed? The infrastructure could be destroyed before it has a chance to work, and the drilling might have actually accelerated the timeline to eruption. Another concern that NASA researchers privately acknowledge is the potential for human error or equipment failure. The drilling equipment would need to operate in extreme conditions, dealing with temperatures and pressures that push the limits of current technology. A catastrophic equipment failure deep within the magma chamber could have unpredictable consequences. But perhaps the most troubling aspect of this plan is that it's never been tested on this scale. While geothermal energy extraction is a well-established technology, no one has ever attempted to cool a supervolcano. The geological and thermal dynamics of Yellowstone are incredibly complex, and computer models can only predict so much. Despite these concerns, NASA believes the risks of doing nothing outweigh the risks of intervention. But they're not sharing all their data with the public, and that should concern everyone. What makes this situation even more urgent is that Yellowstone isn't the only supervolcano threatening human civilization. NASA's proposal is designed to spark discussions about what to do about the approximately 20 supervolcanoes around the planet before one of them triggers a volcanic winter that could end modern civilization. Mount Toba in Sumatra erupted 74,000 years ago, releasing 700 cubic miles of lava and leaving a thick layer of ash across an enormous region. Some scientists believe this eruption nearly drove humanity to extinction, reducing the global human population to as few as 10,000 individuals. In comparison, Mount Krakatoa's 1883 eruption, one of the largest documented eruptions in recent history, ejected only about 3 cubic miles of material. New Zealand's Taupo supervolcano, Japan's Era caldera, California's Long Valley, and Indonesia's Toba all have the potential to produce civilization-ending eruptions. Any one of these could trigger a global catastrophe that would make the COVID-19 pandemic look like a minor inconvenience. The terrifying reality is that we have no comprehensive plan for dealing with any of these threats. While NASA has developed a theoretical approach for Yellowstone, there are no similar projects being considered for other supervolcanoes around the world. We're essentially playing geological Russian roulette with the future of human civilization. Now let's examine what's really happening with Yellowstone's current activity, because the official reassurances don't tell the whole story. In March 2023, the University of Utah seismograph stations recorded 354 earthquakes in the Yellowstone region. While officials downplay this as normal activity, the most significant event was a magnitude 3.7 earthquake that was part of a swarm of 106 earthquakes that began on March 29th and continued through the end of the month. Michael Poland, a geophysicist at the Yellowstone Volcano Observatory, claims that the volcano won't erupt anytime soon. He states that there must be enough magma ready to erupt beneath the surface and enough pressure to cause this magma to rise, and that neither condition exists today. But here's what he's not telling you: these conditions can change rapidly, and the monitoring systems we have in place might not provide adequate warning. The monitoring team tracks earthquake frequency, ground deformation, temperature changes in thermal features, and gas emissions. While they claim to be watching for warning signs, the reality is that supervolcano eruptions are so rare that we have very limited data on what the warning signs actually look like. Poland and his team want you to believe that because the last major eruption was 640,000 years ago, we're not due for another one anytime soon. They say that volcanoes don't follow timelines, and that's technically true. But what they're not emphasizing is that the intervals between Yellowstone's major eruptions have been getting shorter: 2.1 million years ago, then 1.3 million years ago, then 640,000 years ago. If this pattern continues, we might be closer to the next eruption than anyone wants to admit. Despite official claims that volcanoes don't follow schedules, there are concerning patterns in Yellowstone's behavior that suggest we might be entering a more active phase. The ground deformation, increased seismic activity, and changes in thermal features all indicate that something is happening beneath the surface. The magma chamber is currently only 5 to 15% molten, well below the 50% threshold typically required for a major eruption. But geological processes can accelerate rapidly. New magma injections from deeper sources could quickly change these percentages. Temperature increases could melt more of the existing rock. Structural changes in the chamber could lower the threshold required for eruption. What's particularly concerning is that we don't fully understand all the factors that could trigger a super-eruption. The geological processes involved are incredibly complex, and our monitoring systems, while sophisticated, are still relatively primitive compared to the forces we're trying to track. While Yellowstone gets most of the attention, other supervolcanoes around the world pose equally serious threats. Indonesia's Toba supervolcano, which nearly ended human civilization 74,000 years ago, shows signs of renewed activity. New Zealand's Taupo has had multiple super-eruptions and continues to show geological unrest. California's Long Valley caldera has been showing increased seismic activity and ground deformation for decades. While it hasn't produced a super-eruption in recent geological history, it has all the characteristics of a supervolcano and the potential to devastate the western United States. Japan's Era caldera, located beneath Kagoshima Bay, poses a threat not just to Japan but to the entire Pacific region. A major eruption there could trigger tsunamis and ash clouds that would affect multiple countries. The sobering reality is that any one of these supervolcanoes could erupt with little warning, and we have no coordinated global response plan. While NASA has developed a theoretical approach for cooling Yellowstone, similar projects aren't being considered for other supervolcanoes around the world. So what does all this mean for you and your family? The NASA Insider's revelation exposes the uncomfortable truth that our government and scientific institutions are aware of threats that could end civilization as we know it, but they're not sharing the full scope of these threats with the public. The NASA cooling plan, while innovative, remains theoretical and untested. Even if it works, it would take decades to implement and could potentially trigger the very disaster it's meant to prevent. Meanwhile, other supervolcanoes around the world continue to pose similar threats with no mitigation plans in development. What do you think about NASA's secret plan to cool Yellowstone? Do you believe we should be taking more aggressive action to address supervolcano threats, or are the risks of intervention too great? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe for more revelations that weren't meant to reach the public. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. Thanks for being with us. Leave a comment, like to show your support, and remember to hit that subscribe button for more exciting videos. See you next time.